standing up the front is not my comfort zone at all. But when they asked me if I'd share my testimony tonight, I just knew that actually this is something that I really want to share. Listening to Nathan's testimony tonight, God at work in people's lives, that's exactly why I'm standing up here, because just like if your child or your spouse or somebody important in your life had an impact on your life, you'd want to give them the credit and tell people. And that's what I want to do tonight. I want to give God the credit, the glory for what he's done in my life. So I hope that it's an encouragement to you. When I was growing up, I used to go to church every Sunday, and I learned about God there and in school as well. I knew Bible stories, and I definitely believed that God was real. I was quite academic and sporty. I had lots of friends, and I was happy. Certainly happy in all the areas of my life that I could control. And probably on the surface, I looked like a graceful swan. Well, maybe not graceful, but underneath, those feet were flapping like mad, just to try and stay above water. I grew up in a home that was really quite broken. There was a lot of hurt and trauma, and there was things that no child should ever experience. My parents' relationship was very broken. Because as children, we'd frequently been told, that my parents were going to separate, and in some ways we really wanted it, in other ways we just wanted a normal home, and it just felt like so much tension and so much burden to be carrying as a young child. We thought as siblings that separation, like if my parents separated, then I guess that'd make everything better. And when I was 12, they did, but in many ways it just made it worse. There was lots of solicitor letters and court cases, and as kids we were just stuck in the middle, and we tried to do anything just to keep the peace. Although I also I should have just tried to do anything to keep the peace. I used to try and, show my dad the beauty in my mum and show my mum the beauty in my dad, and it just made my relationship with both quite hard, because they thought that I was sticking up for the other person all the time, and during the summer I used to work just so that I could pay for my school shoes or the pens that I needed, just so that I didn't have to ask one and start a fight because they'd send me to the other, But I was in boarding school at this time. For all of my secondary school, I was in boarding school. And I know for lots of people, they think boarding school is like where you go if you're bold, or, that it must be a really horrible place. But actually, for myself and my siblings, this was our happy place, And I have a friend who I met in boarding school, and she knew snippets about home. She might have walked in while I was on the phone trying to solve a problem, or she saw some of the pain and the tears. She saw the burden that I was carrying and the responsibility that I was, I guess, shouldn't have had to carry at that age. I have an older sister and 2 younger brothers, and I was trying to parent my brothers, and And so she knew God. I knew about God. I'd gone to church. I knew, he created the world. He fed the 5,000. But she knew God. And she taught me, she used to write me notes. We had supervised study every evening, and she used to write me notes, just to say, God sees the pain you're in. God sees what's going on. He cares and he loves you, And I went from knowing about God to learning of his character. And she just introduced me to a father who wants to hold me and help me and walk with me, And she invited me to a meeting quite like this. There was songs I didn't know. There was people sticking their hands up in the air. I was quite uncomfortable. I didn't know what was going on. But I can tell you, I didn't actually even have a clue what the speaker said. But that night, God's love came down and overwhelmed me. It's like everything in me just opened all the pain and the tears, all of the heartache, it just flowed out of me. The tears just kept coming. And that night, I knew that God was real. He wasn't just sitting up on a cloud. He wasn't looking down on the earth. But he saw me, and he loved me, and he was with me. And so for the next couple of years, I was learning lots about Jesus in a way that I had never known before. All of this time, I was in a relationship with a great guy. He was my childhood sweetheart, and he supported me through so much of that home stuff. And I really depended on him. He held me through the really hard times, and he showed love to me that I hadn't experienced in any other way, and he was definitely my rescuer in lots of situations. But he didn't know God. And as I started to learn more about Jesus, that was like the missing part. So I was growing my faith and following God, but he wasn't. And there was just that divide, in our lives. And I went to Uganda on a mission trip, so it just myself and a group of people, we went to share about God to young kids in an orphanage. And I was there for 3 weeks, and during those 3 weeks I thought I was going to help these people, But God, he spoke into my life. There was a guy who was leading the group, and I didn't really have anybody to bounce things off of from when I had been at that meeting, as a 16-year-old and trying to figure out about Jesus and what all these things meant. And I came to him and I was like, what does God say about this? And, what should I do about that? And he didn't tell me, oh, don't do that now, and you shouldn't be with him, and you should be going there. And, he just sat down and he opened the Bible with me. And he pointed me to different scriptures, and he revealed things to me that I had never known or seen before. And I came away from there, and I just knew that God wants me to partner with somebody who's going to build up my faith. Who's going to show me God. And so I returned from that trip, and I knew I was going to break up with him. But I didn't. Because it was hard. That was my beautiful thing, Everything else was pretty messy, but that was beautiful. And about 3 months later, there was a situation I was in, and it was the middle of the night, and that night I genuinely feared for my safety. And just like so many other times in my life, I kind of, my head thought, oh, ring to him and he'll come, But actually, it was the middle of the night and I was too far away. And that night, I had a fresh realization that nobody but God can protect me. And I just knew. So I broke up with him. God spoke to me really clearly, actually, that night. And it really hurt my heart, It was like, in so many ways, I didn't want to break up with him. But I was so sure that God had the best for me and that I really wanted to follow him. So I gave up the one thing that I thought was good, that was stable, and that was loving in my life. And for me, I realized from that, just that I never ignore the voice of God, So whether it's here tonight that he's speaking to you for the first time, or he's speaking to you again, you've been walking with him for a long time, but he's calling you to follow him and not your own ways. Just don't brush it aside. If you hear God, don't brush it aside. God has endless blessings which he wishes to bestow on us, and he wants to lead you in that beautiful life that has so much more value and worth than anything. Like I thought that, that relationship was the most beautiful thing in my life. But actually when God speaks to you and you follow his path, it's going to be way more beautiful than you could ever imagine. Just like if we had children, and they're following the wrong path, your natural instinct is that you want to go and steer them and guide them, the right way. And God's just like that. He sees so much more than what we can see, and he wants to take us, and he wants us to allow him to guide us. And his heart is always for us, I may have thought that was the best thing in my life, but God's heart is for me, so he wouldn't have spoken into my life in that way and asked me to do something if it wasn't towards me, for me, And in the Bible, in Matthew 7, it says that you then know how to give good gifts to your children. So if we can give good gifts to our children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good things to those who ask him? And that's exactly what God did. He gave me way more than I could ever ask or imagine in the person of Phil, who's my husband for the last 11 years. I certainly wasn't looking for a relationship at the time. But Phil came into my life, and he's really hardworking, he's really self-sacrificing, and he's very gentle. He loves me when I'm really not very lovely. And in the past decade, in our relationship, he's never had an angry outburst. And it's not to say that we don't have difference of opinion, but the home that we have now is so far removed from what I experienced growing up. And our home is a really happy home. And my previous relationship, he was really loving too. But the difference is that Phil points me to Jesus. His character, the way, the faith that he has, the hope that he has, the trust that he places in Christ to be our guide. God is a Father that sees beyond what we can see, and Phil is always pointing me to look at that. And it's quite natural for us to just, to trust God with our next steps. It makes sense. So in our lives, God has shown so much provision and faithfulness, and that's kind of the cornerstone of my testimony. In Phil's job, so he was brought up on a farm, and it's all about working hard. I see his nephew here, and he knows all about working hard too. And so, but I guess he's never had the security of a permanent contract. God has always provided, and Phil has always worked hard to provide, and we're blessed beyond measure. But there are times when we couldn't meet our rent and bills. I remember there was this one time he trained as a pastry chef with these Italian guys who had just started up their business, and they couldn't afford to pay him 40 hours a week. So he used to work usually, about 40 hours, but he got paid for 30. And as the business grew, they were going to be able to pay him more, But at the time, we were just 200 or 300 euro every month short, for that 6-month period till the business was going to be able to pay him more. And we went to the social welfare office, which was a really, really big deal for Phil to, go and say, I need help. And the guy sat in front of us, he said, you guys, it's really quite easy. You've got 3 options. So the first one, if you quit your job, dude, you'll be 700 euro a month better off than your man down the road. That's what he does. And so quit your job, you'll have lots of time and you'll have lots more money. But he didn't know my husband, so that was a straight out no. The second option, he was like, just get her pregnant, when you have kids, you get loads more supports. He didn't know that it was not that easy, but also it would take 9 months, so. And the third option was to alter his pay slip, and he just, he said, off the record, whatever, if you can just change this pay slip, we can, support you. If you put it down as 29 hours instead of 30 hours, this is how crazy the system was, then if you're on 29 hours a week, then we can support you. Or do you think your employers would be okay with that? And he knew that his employers were. And we came back and we spoke to people that we really admired and trusted. We prayed about it, and it didn't sit right with us. It was definitely the easier of the options, but we decided actually, no, God is going to provide. We didn't know how that looked. But a friend of mine who didn't know anything about our circumstances, because I'd only really just gotten to know her, she put an envelope through our letterbox store, and I opened it, and there was 300 euro in it, which is what we needed for the end of that month. And on the front of it just said, we felt like God saying we should give this to you. And to this day, she would still say, she didn't do it because I had said anything to her. She just genuinely felt like God said, give the money. And month after month, he's provided for us. He provided a great little apartment for us in Dublin. He provided money for us to get by. And Phil's worked some really poor conditions, pretty horrible hours, mostly minimum wage jobs, but we've always had enough. And we're not rich, even though actually right now we think we are rich, but you know, from where we've come from. But we're so wealthy in all of the immaterial things, and we have all we need, and we have more than we need. The other area of our life that God has blessed us so much with is children. So I have a gynae condition. When I was 18, I was told there's a high probability that I was infertile, and you know, the consultant just said, basically, prepare yourself for that. And we have 3 beautiful, very busy boys. And so, like, I know the struggle of month after month, you know, looking at that test and seeing not pregnant, but I also know the joy of conceiving and being able to raise my tribe of monkeys, as anybody who's part of the church knows. And the other reason that that's so miraculous is because I have ME. I'm so far from what I was, but a decade ago, I used to be able to shower without sitting on a seat in the shower, and I had to wait till Phil was home from work to do that because it would drain me so much that I'd need his help getting out, and he used to blow dry my hair, and I used to lie in the bed for quite a time afterwards just to have the energy to be able to get up again, you know. And during the day, if I did one thing, so if I did laundry, that didn't mean putting on a load of washing, taking it out, hanging it out, coming in, folding it up. It meant putting it in the washing machine and pressing start, or taking it out of the washing machine. And I remember actually listening to somebody else's testimony who shared something really similar to me years ago, and that struck my, because I didn't think anybody else, I don't know, it seems so strange to think back on those times, because now you just do what you do and you don't even think about it, but it was so hard to just do one small task. And I felt really isolated, actually, and I was depressed, and it was just a dark place. And I really battled with God, you know, because I used to be so active, and I love people and doing things in church, and, you know, I had a job that I was achieving in before I got sick. And as I alluded to, money was really tight. We only had the one car, and Phil needed it for work. And I didn't have the strength to walk to the bus stop, so if I wanted to meet with somebody, I couldn't get there, you know. And I just felt like a real failure. So I just gotten married. I was a new wife, but like, what had Phil gained? He was doing everything for me. He was going to work. He was coming home. If he didn't put my lunch on a plate in the fridge, he would come home, and I wouldn't have eaten because I wouldn't have had the strength to get up and to make my own lunch. Yeah, I just battled with God. I was like, but God, if I'm not sick, I can do this, I could do that. And I didn't actually even feel like I was being selfish. I was like, God, I could help at church, or I could meet with this person who needs a friend, you know. I just didn't feel like I was of any value to anybody. And I really, actually, it's like, God, just take it away, you know. And meanwhile, Phil could see the beauty in it. He was saying, you know, God's molding his character. I told you he's way better than me. But I couldn't see anything of value. But Phil's character was pointing me to Jesus. I wasn't physically healed, and I really battled with God at that time. But I was at real spiritual peace when I gave it all to God. And still to this day, I just know that God's goodness and his faithfulness remains the same despite our changing circumstances. And I still live with ME. I have a weakened immune system, but I'm miles away from what I was. And it's a genuine miracle that I can raise those 3 very busy boys. And that I can do anything beyond that, you know. And certainly a huge amount of that is attributed to Phil and the amount that he supports us as a family and doing way above and beyond what he should have to do. But I just want to give God the credit, you know, because I remember sitting with my consultant when I had ME and saying, like, we really want children, but we've come here today to ask you if this is something that we should Like, is it possible? You know, I couldn't climb a flight of stairs. So is it possible? And amazingly, this consultant was a Christian, and he said, medically speaking, it's a massive challenge. But between you and me, because he knew that I was also a Christian, he said, between you and me, we know that God is bigger than that. And he sat down and he had a real straight talking conversation with Phil, and he was like, listen, if you have children, this is what it's going to look like. You know, you're going to have to do a heck of a lot more than anybody would normally have to do. But yeah, I want to give God the credit for amazing. And then the other thing that's really like provision of God is our house. So we used to live in Dublin until 3 years ago, and we moved to Tullamore. So we always slag Phil off because we used to say, Phil doesn't just think that Tullamore is the centre of Ireland, he thinks it's the centre of the universe, you know. He always wanted to come back to Tullamore. This is where his family is from, and family is really important to him. And at the time, you know, rent in Dublin and buying a house was impossible. I remember we went to many different banks to look for a mortgage. And we actually genuinely got accused of laundering money from one of the banks, because they looked at our income and they said, like, you can't possibly live off of this, so you have to declare the rest, you know. Like, there is no more, I can assure you. If there is, we would be using it. And so we got turned down, you know, and we were looking at lots of different options. And at God's right time, he provided, there's this scheme that he provided, which is essentially a mortgage for people who are on lower income thresholds. So there's a certain criteria you have to meet for the European Central Bank and all of the normal banks to give you a mortgage. But if you can show that you are able to pay back a mortgage, there's a scheme that the government launched just at the right time for us, and we have a home that we think is amazing. It's just a normal house, but you know what's amazing to us is that it's a real big part of our heart that we would be able to host people and have people around, and God has provided that and so much more. And just the last thing that I want to touch on, because when I was thinking about my testimony, one of the things that I really felt like God was saying to me is to speak about how he is the restorer of relationships. So I alluded to a little bit of my upbringing, and I was trying to think of the best way to phrase my relationship with my dad and where it was at. And I just didn't really have any words. I was hoping they'd come to me as I stood up here. But honestly, it was just the lowest of low. I had no love in my heart for him. And there was just so many hurts, you know, and I genuinely believed that it was beyond repair. I'd often heard different people sharing about how God can reach into anybody's life. Don't think you're too far gone. And I believed that. But with this relationship, I genuinely believed it was just too far gone. And now, with all of my heart, I can genuinely say that I love him. Yeah, it's not like a love that I could muster up. It's a God totally transforming me. I'm really eager to spend time with him, and I couldn't have said that before. I remember phone calls used to be max 30 seconds, and it was very business-like. What do you want? You know, just really quite unbearable. And now, I don't want to embarrass my dad on his soft side, but like now we end a phone call, he says, "Gucci goo, I love you." And I didn't hear those words growing up, you know, and we didn't have love for one another. But Gucci goo, I love you, Dad. And it didn't happen overnight, and it hasn't. Not everything has changed. There's still things that come up, and there's still aspects of both of us that need to be refined, you know. But God radically changed both of us. Yeah. And then I guess God is just not, he's not just for the big things in life. You know, there's some things like Nathan spoke of. He really needed taken from that place of that psychosis. And I needed taken from my place of brokenness. But God's not just for the big moments in life, doing every single day with God, making those choices, like what job do I do? What school do I send my kids to? How do I use my money and my time? What's my value? What's my purpose? Where am I going? The pain that I have, how do I carry it, And God's there for every single bit of that. And I just want to encourage you, He can be at work in your life. He's not just at work in the good people's lives. Don't look at us standing up here and assume that God would treat us any differently to you. Don't think that you're too far gone or that you're too ugly inside. Don't think about the secrets that maybe only you know, and God sees them, and think he couldn't possibly have you as his child. Because the same love that he loves us with, he loves you with. And in the Bible, in Romans 5, it reminds us that God shows his love for us, that when we were sinners, that's when Christ died for us. It wasn't when I was the shiniest, best version of myself that God accepted me. And Cian and Nathan, they're great guys, but God didn't reach into the darkness in their lives because they're anything special. They're not superior to you. But the beauty that you see in their lives, in any Christian's life, that's because of how God has transformed them. And the other thing that the Bible reminds us is that God doesn't show any partiality, It says in Acts that anyone who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him. So tonight, if your heart says, yes, God, I need you and I want you, don't ignore the voice of God and don't ignore that call. Don't keep going your own way. God has reached each one of us because of his absolute love for us. And it's that same love that he loves you. That overwhelming love, that night that I poured out all of my pain to him, that overwhelming love is the same love that he loves you with. He sees all of the hurts in your heart. He sees your hopes and your questions, what's next, or how can I fix this relationship? What's the purpose? Why? Where am I going, And he really, 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 really wants to help you with it. He wants to give you that purpose and a sense of direction, and he really wants to restore your relationships. And he wants to be that father to you. So thank you to Rory and Dee Dee for letting me share tonight, and to Gavin and Wendy for all the amazing work this church does.
Thank you for the goodness of God, man. Andrea just got a word while you were up there, and I think I just feel God saying to you that he's not done there. He's not done yet. He's going to keep moving in your finances. He's going to keep moving in your life and in your children's life. He's going to put you in places where you feel uncomfortable, sorry for you, but you're going to have the peace that surpasses all understanding when you're standing up there giving your testimony many times more.